So a new interview with Luke of the Kooks and Richard of Hardfi, or Ricky Fi as NME called him back in the day, dropped on BBC News yesterday, and it caused a slight stir on social media. Let's have a look at it. The headline on the article is "Why These 2000s Indie Heroes Are Back Bigger Than Ever." Now let's break that down for a start. I'm sure some people aren't having them as 2000s indie heroes, but they definitely will have been to some people. As that caption says, they sold millions of records between them, so fair play. As for being bigger than ever, I guess we'll have to wait for the article to justify that one. I suppose it's maybe worth clarifying where I stand on these two bands. Firstly, I think that both had strong moments. I can hear Dave Laser throwing a Kirk Zero at the screen as I say that, but I think it's true. Are they moments I find myself wanting to revisit now? Not particularly. However, I will say that I enjoyed the Kooks' first album, and enjoyed their gig at Adelphi and Hull back in about 2006. More than the band itself, I imagine, as they didn't seem to be into the raucous nature of the crowd. To be fair, people at the front did keep smashing the microphone into Luke's face. I also enjoyed watching their set a few years ago at Transmit Festival on YouTube, as the festival's famously mad crowd were going suitably mad for all the old classics. I never got particularly invested in Hardfi, but will happily listen to Hard to Beat if it comes on the radio. Anyway, on with the article. I'm pretty sure we hung it out at Brixton. Hopefully I didn't embarrass myself. Luke Pritchard, the eternally youthful singer of the Kooks, is reintroducing himself to fellow indie survivor and Hardfi frontman Richard Archer. Indie survivor is an interesting term, probably quite accurate for those bands who managed to navigate their way through that scene without too much pain. Both admit the 2000s, when they each sold millions of records, are a bit of a blur. But I think I'd remember if you'd done something odd, reassures Archer. All chiselled good looks and friendly bon ami. If that's how you say it. It's weird because we're all part of the same scene, but when you're on tour, everyone's like planets, orbiting around but missing each other. The Kooks and the Fi were at the epicentre of the last great indie boom, a scene that kicked off in 2002 when the Libertines jolted British guitar music out of its post-Britpop slump. Very NME terms there. Over the next half-decade, they joined acts like Franz Ferdinand, Kaiser Chiefs and Razorlight as they surfed a wave to the top of the charts. Angular riffs, clever lyrics, I wonder why they're double clever there, and big hooky choruses were the order of the day. By 2006, 7 of the UK's 10 best-selling new albums were by guitar bands, including the Arctic Monkeys' Incendiary debut, Whatever People Say I Am, That's What I'm Not, and the Kooks' Inside In, Inside Out. But the party couldn't last forever. In 2008, the Word magazine coined the phrase indie landfill to describe a seemingly endless parade of identikit bloke bands cluttering the airwaves. Where were they all coming from? Why couldn't you tell them apart? Why were they all called The Something? Almost overnight, radio stations ditched indie for a new generation of forward-thinking pop. Lady Gaga, Florence and the Machine, and club-centric hip-hop, Black Eyed Peas and Dizzy Rascal. It did suddenly seem that 4 boys in the band became very unhip, says Archer. The opportunities dried up in England, agrees Pritchard. We were playing smaller venues and the vibe just wasn't exciting anymore. It got to the point where we were just exhausted, Archer continues. It felt like we were screaming into the void, so we stopped and tried other things. In the 2010s, Hardfi's guitarist Ross Phillips retrained as a Tyler, while Archer formed the short-lived blues band Off-World. But when he streamed an acoustic set of Hardfi songs during COVID, the response was big enough to tempt the band back onto stage. A one-off gig at London's Forum sold out in minutes. The response was just so warm I was quite taken aback by it, says Archer. The show led to a full reunion. This summer the band released a 20th anniversary edition of their class-conscious, Mercury Prize-nominated debut Stars of CCTV, while preparing a long-delayed 4th album. The Kooks, meanwhile, never went away, recording a clutch of more experimental albums that blended drum loops, pastoral pop, and even Ethiopian jazz influences. Sounds a bit Johnny Burrell. But today the band are bigger than ever after hits like Naive and Ooh La found a new audience on TikTok. Later this year they will headline the O2 Arena for the first time, with 18 to 24 year olds making up 45% of the audience. I guess that's where the idea that they're bigger than ever comes in, and with a stat like that you'd have to say fair enough. As for Hardfi though, not sure. How do they explain this sudden revival? We're at that point where teenagers start going back to listen to the music their parents grew up with, Pritchard observes. In the 90s we did it too. Going back and discovering Nick Drake, so there's a circular nature to it. The scene and even the fashion has come around again. Is that true? I wouldn't say I'm down with the teenagers, but I haven't seen that for myself. It would be interesting to see that style coming back in though. Get your desert scarves out. I suppose these guys are the ones playing the gigs, so if they're seeing young people in the audience with this style, then fair play. But there's something else too. Songs like the Kooks, She Moves in Her Own Way, and Hardfi's Hard to Beat have something that went missing in the 2010s. Choruses you can sing until you're hoarse. I mean, that statement alone probably requires its own deep dive, but it does feel like the big indie bands now, like Fontaine's DC, certainly have a different way of singing. And yeah, maybe don't have the same type of choruses back then. I'm not saying it's not as good, it's just very different. I'm sure people might say it has more substance to it now as well, but leave that for the comments. Yeah, that anthemic thing was removed from guitar music, agrees Pritchard. People started consuming music on earbuds so they connected with the introspective stuff. That's also an interesting point. So he's saying that people have started listening to music in earbuds more instead of out loud, and therefore the dynamic of what they want to listen to has changed. I'm not sure I've got the energy to think about that properly, but maybe people are writing songs with that in mind more. Another one for the comments. But when we were gathering a little fan base in Brighton, we'd play all these small clubs and you'd filter the setlist by whether people could sing along to the hook. It's almost like when a comedian says they play these warm-up shows and get rid of the gags that don't get laughs. Interesting approach, maybe that's quite common, I don't know. Archer recalls the grind of those early tours. In their first year, he reckons, Hardfire were on the road for almost 365 days. But with one grassroots venue closing every fortnight in the UK, it's getting harder to book tours and road test songs. What worries me, if you're a new artist now, do you have the opportunity to go out there and make mistakes and fix them, says Archer. A shrinking live scene isn't the only upheaval in the industry. The Kooks' debut album sold 1.5 million copies in 2006, making it the 5th biggest record of the year. Compare that with 2024 when the best-selling album in the UK, Taylor Swift's Tortured Poets Department, only sold 600,000 copies. Streams have cannibalised sales, turning every artist into a cult act. It doesn't help that opportunities for promoting music have dried up. The only music TV show left standing is Later with Jules Holland, while weekly music magazines like the NME are no more. Not that everyone laments its demise. We were never the best friends with the NME, laughs Archer. Who was? Asked Pritchard. There were 2 or 3 anointed bands and the rest of us were cast out. And that's where former editor of NME, Conor McNicholas, comes in. So yeah, Conor took to Instagram to react to this article, and he said, bands from the noughties NME indie scene bitching about not being best friends with the NME, while being illustrated with images of them being invited to the NME Awards. And you can find invite images from multiple NME Award years with a quick online search. Both bands were NME cover stars and both featured on cover mount CDs. Who were these anointed bands they were competing against? And what the hell did they get that was a bigger endorsement than that? I think each band only had one cover, and there was a clear reason for that. I could tell you, but you won't like it. And the NME is still going strong and reaching more people globally than ever in its history. Still, I admire your ability to rise above your victimisation and persevere. Crack on, lads. He follows it up by saying, come to think of it, I remember personally making the trek out to Staines, effing Staines, to visit Hardfire in their studio in a lockup on a light industrial estate to hear early tracks from their second album. The glamour was positively overwhelming. Still, what are friends for? And there's some interesting replies from prominent people around that scene, including the Holloways, who said, these guys had a great moment. Why moan about perceived slight? You did a great job back then of featuring loads of new bands. I remember us once being described as an NME darling band, yet these guys got loads more than us. We just loved getting in it at all. And then Billy Lunn of the Subways. Wait, what? I remember them getting plaudits galore in those pages. Then friend of the pod Dave of Dutton's Bar Mitzvah weighs in, being as subtle as ever. Completely agree with you, they were both utter dog crap. But how is NME still going strong and reaching more people than it ever has? If you're talking in terms of website engagement, then maybe. But last time I looked at NME.com, it was just full of loads of crap about Spider-Man, Wizard films and nonsense. Well, NME did feature an article about the podcast recently, Dave, so I hope you're not referring to us. Then obviously I had to chime in and said that I was pretty sure Mark Beaumont claimed Hardfire with a second coming in NME. So let's qualify that, shall we? It doesn't say what rating Mark Beaumont gave the album in this review, but according to Wikipedia it was 9 out of 10. So let's see what it says, shall we? Lock up your iPods, Middle England. Here comes Generation Asbo, scowling into Rock's blue water with their disco sequined hoodies pulled over their brows and glow stick ankle tags flashing. Hardfire watch the security cameras wear in their direction and clock the undercover filth taking up pincer formation. Holy moly. They take a moment to pause for the lenses. Here, they're superstars of the surveillance room after all. Then leg it, tearing down the aisles of punk heritage. They snatch and grab with well-cased precision. London's calling into an inside pocket. The Marshall... Creating quite the image, isn't he? Working class AF. The Marshall Mathers LP into a thigh pouch of their combats. The skankier bits from the Gorillaz' first album and the Rapture's spare cowbells... down the front of their pants. They burst out onto the fire escape and burn off in a stolen Fiesta, stopping only to happy slap the dead 60s for trying to start a shit copy of Scar revival in the car park. Happy slapping, remember that? Bear rock pilfering, bruv. Except, of course, barring one conviction for bowling under the influence. Hard-fire, no cartoon street thugs. Leaping straight off a Dixon staff room wanted poster and into the charts. No stain so solid, there's a more pertinent and true-to-life social statement that you'll find in any Daily Mirror Teen Terror editorial. Hard-fire know that all the most important bands, from the Pistols to the Smiths, to the Roses and beyond, reflect and feed off the political frustrations of their age. If they didn't happen to be making brilliant music, there'd still be a Channel 4 film crew making a State of Our Youth documentary about them. Were they really that straight? I don't remember this. And Hardfire know that. In 2005's wilderness of Blairite betrayal, they are the voice of the new ghost town. He's basically putting them up with the specials there, which is pretty wild in hindsight. See, Hardfire represent an until now silent substrata of youth culture. What the Libertines did for grotty, beautiful East End drug poets, Hardfire doing for the dull for life working class, suburban estate nowhere kids. The M25 their prison wall, the night bus route an escape rope that never reaches far enough. Their lives plotted out from birth right down to the nth unwanted ankle biter, the X number of job start courses, the Y months of community service and the Z allocation of caravan holidays in Bognor. Their lives a ceaseless trudge from suspicious career counsellor to discount off licence to violent nightclub doorman and back again. Screw all your traditional values and decent working families bullshit, Mr. Blair. Here's the news: Hardfire are England, and all who fail in her. I mean, I came from a working class environment and never latched onto Hardfire speaking for me. But I guess they did talk about the mundane and turn it into decent songs. But the lyrics were almost comedy rather than inspiring. I don't really know. Hence Stars of CCTV. His frontman Richard Archer's howl of defiance against a dead youth. Expanded from its original self-financed mini-album last year, it's now a satellite town statistic existence torn through in a bleak but dazzling 45-minute fast-forward. And the minutiae are heartbreakingly familiar. Every cash machine is set permanently to insufficient funds. Every pregnancy test to positive. This guy, I have to say, Matt Beaumont here sounds like he's a politician who wants to come across as knowing what working class life is like. A lot of stereotypes being thrown about, etc. One old schoolmate is dodging car bombs in Baghdad, Middle Eastern holiday. Another is dodging shower daddies in Feltham Young Offenders Institute. Feltham is singing out. Friday never comes too soon, living for the weekend, while the rest of the week is spent skint and despondent at a tower block window, watching the planes rise out of Heathrow and dreaming of anywhere else. Plaintive piano soul ballad, Move On Now. And all while the street surveillance cameras zoom in, waiting for you to turn scumbag, they all do. Every move that I make gets recorded to tape so someone up there can keep me safe. Archer falsettos on the deceptively jaunty title track. Think Simon and Garfunkel's Cecilia being bundled into a police van, covered in kebab vomit and bloody bits of tooth. And suddenly Dry Your Eyes seems about as straight as Derek off Big Brother. Nice reference of the time there. I think Mike Skinner and the Streets seem much more in touch with youth culture, and the street songs definitely stood the test of time more than Hardfire. Could be wrong about though. Get in the comments again. Stars of CCTV is more than a mere pop record. It's the handbook of a mongrel generation that feels discarded, untrusted and invisible to all but the shopping city security. But if a flick through the lyric sheet has you reaching for the DVD of Nil by Mouth for light relief, the wonder of Stars is how magnificently alive all this suburban angst sounds. Tarring Hardfire with the same Scar revival brush as dullards like the Ordinary Boys in their dead 60s, it turns out a bigger injustice than Coldplay being kept off number one by Crazy Frog. Personally, I would rather listen to the Ordinary Boys' first album than Hardfire, but each to their own. There is a tirelessly inventive, genre-splicing genius at work here, producing never-before-imagined dark pop concoctions. The Obbers mob chanting 21 years old and out on Feltham is Singing Out are given a cinematic yardy sheen by dollops of Dre-style drive-by strings. Cash Machine is more Gorillaz, Clint Eastwood, or an overdosing hot heat than anything off Sandinista. Hard to Beat isn't currently felching the chart to within an inch of its life because of its spiky way with a new wave guitar, but because of the way said guitars are coiled around Stardust spangliest disco glitter beats, like Joe Strummer pulling a Scissor Sister. Blimey. In fact, the only blatant specials rip-off here opens a brilliantly bitter kiss-off to an unfaithful ex that is better do better, and even that explodes into a ballsy Bono bluster come the chorus. No, Stars may be a record charged with the joyriding danger and 80s desolation vibe of the specials, but it packs a whole bootload of more interesting urban influences and is out to ram-raid the Millennium Dome. Witness the mischievous fury they bring to a song about fighting outside clubs, unnecessary trouble, the Daft Punk enslaved by Muse celebration of living for the weekend. Daft Punk, blimey. It's not a comparison I'd make with Hardfire. Or Hardfire's Claren call, Tied Up Too Tight. That is probably my favourite Hardfire song, actually. Tied Up Too Tight. Very decent. Essentially the snotty urchins from Pink Floyd's Another Brick Wall on an Angel Dust Riot through Morrison's. These are gigantic tunes, and the fact they were recorded on a knackered laptop in a disused taxi office for £38.70 only adds to their gritty magnificence. Is that true? Impressive if so, very urban. So, should we run through the charge sheet one more time? 11 counts of aggravated pop originality and assault with a deadly hook. Several charges of grievous cultural significance and defining a generation without license. Looks like you're going down for Album of the Year, Sunshines. Hell. Pretty Alan Partridge, that last paragraph, but entertaining nonetheless. And yeah, he signed off with a 9 out of 10 apparently. So yeah, it's pretty strong. But shall we see what Hardfire actually said in reply to Conor McNicholas' Instagram post? Actually, Hardfire never had an NME front cover. Despite 2 #1 albums, Mercury and Brit nominations, 5 sold-out Brixtons, etc., and you did call us chavs. So friends, but maybe not best friends. And as a journalist, you'd know that context is not always doable in 1,000 words. We were saying how much poorer the scene is without NME as it was then. Forever grateful for the support we did get. I mean, the way Mark Beaumont described them, you wouldn't think they'd be bothered about being called chavs. He seemed to think it was part of the charm. I don't know. Then Conor has his say to that, saying, well, fair dues, thanks for replying. I'm surprised about the front cover, seems mad that never happened, but I'll defer to your experience. I did over 300, so it's all a bit blurry. And I wouldn't have called you chavs, I don't know who did. That's not cool. There was a voice of suburban working class experience in Hardfire that needed to be respected. Thanks for the message to set the record straight. So yeah, left there fairly amicably. Personally, from speaking to bands on the podcast, it feels like everyone had an up and down relationship with NME. And by their very nature, people seem to accept that sometimes you're going to be flavour of the month and other times you're going to get panned. But what do you make of it? Was Conor right to call them out for the quotes in this article? Do you think the Kooks and Hardfire are bigger than ever? Have your say in the comments.